Let's talk about America's economy. Right now, it's sitting on a time bomb made of debt. Today, we're going to look at what happens when that fuse finally gets lit and the last-ditch emergency plan that's been designed to stop it from blowing up everything. 100%. That right there is America's current debt-to-GDP ratio. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means our national debt is now as big as our entire economic output for a whole year. And that, my friends, puts us in a really, really dangerous position. This quote from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget just says it all. Think of it this way. In the past, whenever America faced an economic crisis, it was like going into a fight with a full war chest. This time, it feels like our emergency fund has already been spent. Okay, let's really get into this. The best way to picture the U.S. economy right now is like a giant Jenga tower. It's still standing, sure, but it's gotten so tall and it's carrying so much debt that it's become incredibly fragile. Look, economic storms, they're just a fact of life. They happen. But our ability to actually weather those storms has been seriously, seriously compromised. And to understand why, you need to see just how much taller and way more unstable our Jenga tower has become. Let's rewind the clock. When the Great Recession hit back in 2008, our debt was only about 35% of our economy. Now that's a pretty strong foundation, right? It gave us the room we needed to borrow and spend our way out of that crisis. Okay, fast forward to the pandemic. By the time COVID-19 showed up, our financial health had weakened a lot. The debt had more than doubled to almost 80% of GDP. All of a sudden, we had much less breathing room. And that brings us to today. At 100%, we are in completely uncharted territory. There is no historical playbook for this. The Jenga tower is taller and shakier than it has ever been, and the next little nudge could be the one that sends the whole thing crashing down. So what could possibly pull that first block from our Jenga tower? Well, funny enough, the most immediate threat might not even be from inside the US. It could be a financial domino that's just starting to tip over on the other side of the world, in Japan. For decades, there's been this thing called the yen carry trade. It's kind of been a hidden engine of global finance. It's this really clever financial play that took advantage of Japan's super low interest rates to pump a massive amount of money into US markets. Here's how this so-called free money game worked. For 30 years, Japan's interest rates were basically zero. So huge investment firms could borrow yen for next to nothing, swap them for dollars, and then buy US government bonds that were paying, let's say, 5%. That difference, that was almost pure profit. But now, the game is totally changing. Japan is finally raising its own interest rates to fight off its own inflation. And just like that, the easy profit from that trade, poof, it's gone. This forces the entire trade to slam into reverse, and suddenly, all those investors have to sell off their US assets to get their money back home. And this is the scale of the problem we're talking about. Japanese investors are the single largest foreign holders of US debt. We're talking over $1.2 trillion worth. If they start dumping those bonds in a hurry to unwind that carry trade, it would just flood the market. That would push American interest rates and, yep, your mortgage payments through the roof. That's the first domino. Okay, now for the second block being pulled from the tower. This one's what they call a geopolitical black swan event. It's one of those unpredictable crises with massive consequences. In this case, it's a conflict that could choke off one of the world's most critical energy arteries. About 20% of the entire world's oil supply flows right through the Strait of Hormuz. A conflict erupting in Iran is already causing major disruptions to that flow, and that's triggering a massive shock to the energy supply. And history is just painfully clear on this. You can look back, nearly every single major oil price spike in the last 50 years has been followed by a major economic recession. The pattern is just undeniable. An energy crisis almost always becomes an everything crisis. So you put these two things together, and here's the crucial point. This 1-2 punch leaves our policymakers with almost no good options. Normally, when a recession hits, the Federal Reserve just cuts interest rates to get the economy going again. But they can't really do that if a huge surge in oil prices is already causing high inflation. They'd basically be throwing gasoline on a fire. They're trapped. So with the Jenga tower teetering on the edge, what on earth can be done? Well, this brings us to a potential solution, a kind of pre-packaged emergency plan. Something you'd break the glass for to brace the economy before it completely collapses. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget has actually proposed this four-part break glass plan. It's designed to let us respond to a crisis without making our long-term debt problem even worse than it already is. Okay, a really core part of this plan is something they call a super pay-go rule. It's simple, but it's really powerful. For every single dollar of emergency borrowing we need right now, Congress would have to find $2 in future spending cuts or new revenue. It's a way to guarantee that any crisis response actually helps reduce the national debt in the long run. The whole goal here is to avoid the mistakes we've made in the past, where a crisis becomes an excuse to pass some political wish list. Under this plan, any response has to be narrowly targeted at the real problem. It has to be temporary, so it doesn't become some permanent new government program. And it has to be bipartisan to make sure it can actually last. And really, this is the ultimate question, isn't it? The economic Jenga Tower is wobbling. We can actually see the shocks forming on the horizon that could send it all crashing down. We have a smart, pre-approved plan on the table, but when the heat is on, in the middle of a crisis, will reason win out over political chaos? Well, that's the trillion-dollar question.